technologically advanced aircraft engine company at the end of World War I. And the rest of the world said, no more weapons from you guys. So what do you do with the world's largest, most technologically advanced aircraft engine company? You make pots and pans and bicycles and engines for boats and trucks and other motorcycle brands. And when they were allowed to start building aircraft engines again, they said, we don't have to build motorcycle engines for other companies anymore. Let's show them what they should have been doing with our beautiful engines. And they built a complete motorcycle, which was this.
What year is that?
1923. This is one of only two that the three actually were made. They began production late October of 23, and the series ones were from about October 20, the date in 23 to November 2nd of 24, and then they did a series 2, which had a timed engine breather system, a push drive in the drive shaft, a front drum brake. 3 years before the first production American bike got a front brake of any sort.
Shaft drive right out of the
And of
block.
course shaft drive, yeah, even the series 1, shaft drive, full double cradle frame, which did become common until the mid 80s, unit construction engine, which wasn't really common until the early 60s, a completely internal full pressure lubrication system,
That's cool.
which they didn't add on.
Is that wood?
The rear brake shoes are wood.
Wow.
Yeah, everybody focuses on the two things that kind of show its age. The old sheave brake with the front brake going to a second brake on the rear.
That's crazy. Like that speedo.
And then the speedometer drive. It's the
That's
second thing
something
everybody
else.
focuses on. It's as simple as it
Sure.
can be. And yet it is kind of intriguing. It has to be that old German spring belt.
Yeah.
So it can grow and shrink with suspension travel.
Right.
A leather belt won't work. It has to be those old, and to stereotype our customers, so many of our customers, I remember years ago, they just see that belt, I used to run the movie projector in the back of, yes, I could have guessed that. But the old German sewing machines and old German movie projectors all had those spring belts. And
How did you guys get your hands on this bike?
it was actually advertised in the American Vintage BMW Club. There was a guy named Hans Kaiser who had a BMW repair shop in Berlin. And
Is that thing pushing air through those?
through...
The intake side.
well,
what
the
is that
intake
thing?
is very well hidden. Which exact thing are you looking
I
at?
thought when I seen that one there, I thought it was some kind of a pump or something. Maybe the pressurizing the intake or something.
From where? I'm not sure exactly
On
what
the
you're pointing
intake
at.
side, that thing
Oh,
up
the
there.
carburetor? That's the carburetor. You have
it's
an
a
air
carburetor?
slide, a fuel slide, like an
Oh,
old
okay.
airplane. Very, very aeronautical.
Yeah.
In fact, this shop has a lot of history.
Well, it's far from the carburetor that I know.
Well,
I
yeah,
would never
it's-
figured that one out.
Yeah, and you actually up on the handlebar have an air slide and a fuel slide, just like an old
So
Model
I
T
guess
or a
that's the
lot of
same thing
airplanes.
there too then, huh?
No, this is, well, it is a carburetor. This is as simple as it gets. These they
I
use.
mean, I noticed this here.
Oh, that's the air filter. Yeah, and BMWs were running air filters in the late 20s, years before a lot of other companies. That one,
that's
the
not
air
oil
filter
bath,
has a
is it?
labyrinth. No. It was a paper element, variations on that going way back.
Cool.
But yeah, this one's technically unsold. That was the Daytona show bike and the press fleet bike. And it was right when they brought out the Slash 5s, they just decided to kind of hang on to it.
Yeah.
And they hung on to it until the American distributor was dissolved. We ended up with this and the Formula 750 Grand Prix bike, which is on display across the street.
Okay.
According to the gentleman who was on the committee that created AMA Superbike racing, that's the bike that inspired the formula for AMA Superbike. It, Formula 750 had really spun out of control about that time.
We don't even have that now.
I
Barring
know, turn signals on the.
And it makes so
Yeah.
much sense. It's the
Yeah.
widest point on the motorcycle.
Can't miss
It's
them.
only one bulb to go out. You can see it, so if something does happen, you know instead of assuming they can see you.
Right.
One thing to get damaged in a tip over instead of two. You don't kick it with your heel, and yet it's wider. It makes so much sense. But when they made turn signals mandatory,
Yeah, that's where
they
the
were a
front
little
end
bit
at.
too small to meet the letter of the law. And so, it's right. But these were optional. They had optional helivar turn signals actually before 1955 even.
Wow.
So, I mean, It's kind of funny how they would do something, but then they'd find some way to throw a speed bump in front of those Germans.
Right.
Yeah, that's a neat idea, but do it a little differently, so you have to do it all over
Totally,
again.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Let's see. Actually, the next frame family after the R32 frame, which they evolved, there's an overhead valve sport model across the street, kind of a nice, very late evolution of this design. And then they actually paid an American engineer to help them design that deep stamped frame, like on the,
This one on the right.
yeah, on the R4, the R2 inside the office, and then this R17 was the ultimate stamped frame. This is actually the first production motorcycle with hydraulically dampened telescopic fork. We call it conventional fork now. BMW actually held the world patent on that and had 3 evolutionary steps, even between 35 and
How
41.
much travel does that have? Do you have?
That one's only about 3.5 inches, which actually was quite a bit compared to a trailing link or a girder or something like that. These were almost 4 inches. We've got an R5, which is the second evolution across the street, and it actually has adjustable dampening. And this R66, this is actually the fork that the Matchless and the Norton copied pretty much directly when the BMW patents were dissolved at the end of World War II. The Norton Roadholder fork is basically this fork just converted to English dimensions. The early Matchless fork, some of the components they didn't even change from metric sizing.
Interesting. Oh, I'm sorry.
This is a world-level Grand Prix race bike, but they actually sold them to civilians, which was very unusual for a MotoGP bike at
That's
that
a
time.
beautiful bike.
Yeah, and that was a real golden era, sort of the end of the gentleman racers. I mean, being sponsored just meant they supplied you the motorcycle, but your
Right.
salary is what you won.
Right. A purse.
Yeah. Walter Zeller came in second in the World Championship on a Rin Sport in 1956, all behind a man named John Surtees in the factory MV Augusta,
Yeah.
which he's still, and I'm sure forever will be the only person to be world champion on 2 and 4 wheels.
Yeah. Yeah. He's an amazing guy.
He was, what's real interesting, I found an article in an English magazine recently, in the period, and I knew that John Surtees had tested on the BMW Rin Sport. He actually made in an English magazine the comment that if BMW had written his paycheck that year, they would have had the world championship. It was a better bike.
Already got their type,
I
so.
mean, that's, I had, about 6 months before that, I had read an article where they were talking about when John Surtees was a factory Ferrari, racer.
Yeah.
And they kept trying to give him a company car,
Passenger.
and he kept
passenger
declining the
seat, huh?
factory, the Ferrari street car, and
Must
kept
have been a
driving his
rough ride
BMW
back there,
aluminum
though.
V8 507 sports car. And pretty much said, I like to get where I'm going. So you can imagine a modern, that's where the gentleman racers who could say, they were not bought and sold, they were
Right.
not spokespeople, they were, they were businessmen, but they were also
Yeah.
men of real principle. They didn't have anything to prove.
Yeah.
My uncle's owned like, I don't know, 300 motorcycles or something, and he
Yeah.
was living in Michigan. And a friend of his said, hey, I'm getting a divorce, and I know you're a motorcycle guy, so there's a motorcycle in his garage, just go get it. And he's like, well, what about your wife? I mean, he's like, she's at work, just go get it. It's,
Get
she's
it
not
out of
gonna,
the
just
garage,
go get
so,
it. And
yeah.
so he went over there. This is a small town.
Yeah.
So he went over there, and the wife came home for lunch, of course.
of course.
So, called the police. Police came. The police know my uncle. It's
Yeah.
such a small town. He's like, look, I'm sure that Bill gave you that bike, but it's technically in her, you can't have it.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, that's fine. And it was a BMW.
Yeah.
And the guy's dad was part of the group that first brought BMWs, so it was like one of 4. So when I was at his house, he was looking through like a magazine, and he goes, at the back page, it had a auction, and one of them went for like 400,000 or something like that, and he was just like, drops the bike thing. He's like, I would have probably sold it way before then,
Yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
like, and he, didn't know about BMWs or anything, didn't care.
Isn't it
but-
crazy how
Yeah.
stuff like that happens?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Most of them actually, I feel, still go for way below what they would be if they were anything but a BMW.
Right,
It's, we were a Crocker dealer, this dealership,
Uh-huh.
and if you're familiar with Crocker motorcycles,
Huh.
they were made here in Southern California.
Mhm.
But, yeah,
Aren't they starting the movie soon?
probably very soon.
Yeah, they should be starting about now.
Yeah.
story on this side?
And
That's
it's
a two-cycle, right?
radial, no, it's a 4-cycle.
Oh, it is?
Three-cylinder.
Three-cylinder, radial.
Pose, radial amp.
That is every definition of unique you could come up
Yeah,
with.
indeed.
That's the only one. One of our good customers, his dad thought it'd be a cool thing to do with his two sons in Cincinnati, Ohio, with long winters. Thus, they engineered and built that drivetrain from scratch.
Did they really?
Full pressure lubrication, a single plate dry clutch like a BMW, but with primary kick-starting, which BMW never figured out how to do with the single plate dry clutch. Roller tappet cam, just ingenious and real Chinese puzzle of an assembly. Tunnel engine case, which is a unique BMW trait.
64, 65 tags, huh?
Yeah, they actually put about 12,000 miles on it. Both sons rode it through their high school careers, and the one who gave it to my dad actually rode it while I was going to Cal State Fullerton.
Oh.
Had it shipped out and used it. And, but he figured my dad was the only person who could get it making noise again, so
Right.
I'd heard about it for years.
Yeah, it's funny to think that there are, these motorcycles just in a garage somewhere that people don't know anything about it. That thing? You want that? What do you want that for?
Just understand making neat old noise.
Yeah. But it's funny, I mean, just like artwork.
Yeah. And they
Somebody
are.
could show me something from a garage, and they could show me something that's supposed to be priceless, and I'll be like, yeah, yeah. Is there a difference?
There's it's the people who appreciate it that make it. You guys are familiar with Bonnie Sunday and that era? We were Dave Aldana's original sponsors here.
Oh,
Those are his first factory BSA leathers. He gave those to me back when they fit me well. They fit my 15-year-old son real well now.
Yeah.
But,
So, Dave, we're,
skeleton leathers.
yeah, so, I live in Atlanta,
Yeah.
and Dave lives in the southeast.
Yeah.
And there's a place where they have one of the GNCCs is in Washington, Georgia, and one of the regional promoters has hair scrambles there also, but on that property they got a dirt track. And there was a bunch of guys on vintage bikes,
Yeah.
and this guy kind of laying on the grass with the leathers.
Yeah. Skeleton
And my
leathers
buddy's
still.
walking, he says, "Who's that guy I think he is, Dave Aldana?" And he says, "I am Dave Aldana."
He's a really neat guy and still actively racing. And,
Yeah, he is.
just,